I'd like to introduce our speaker today then. His name's Loren Spivack, and he's from Yankee Land. He lives in Massachusetts. Went to the University of Massachusetts and was a political science major, yet he's conservative. It's amazing. There's a few things like that happen sometimes. He became active in politics, worked for several nonprofits, and then in 2009 founded Free Market Warrior. One of the things he did, his free market store was expelled from Concord malls in North Carolina for selling material critical of the Obama administration. Simon, who owns it, are great Democratic supporters. But anyhow, he's a very good speaker. I think you'll enjoy him today. He's got books, which he'll be back there on the table after we're done. And so, Loren, if you'd like to come up here, we're very happy to hear you.
Well, thank you all Thank you all so much. It is lovely to be in Texas. I go by the nickname the Free Market Warrior because I travel all over the United States and I talk to groups like yours about free market economics. It is my contention that most of the problems that our country faces today stem from our utter failure to understand even the most basic principles of economics. If you want to understand, how we became the wealthiest country in the history of planet Earth, you need to understand the economics behind it. And then something changed, and we're now well on our way to becoming the poorest country in the history of, we're certainly the most indebted country in the history of planet Earth. Could it have something to do with the fact that we have the exact opposite economic policies as the ones we had back when we were becoming the wealthiest country in the history of the world? We need to talk about this and learn about it. It needs to become part of our national conversation. There is virtually nobody in Congress who understands even the most basic economic concepts that our country depends on. So that's what I do. A couple of years ago, about 6 years ago, I put together a seminar called Economic Literacy, which is designed to help people understand. It's like an economics course for conservatives. It's 2 nights, and it's designed to help people really grasp this. It's a 7-hour program, and I've done it about 300 times now in 22 states. Including Texas. I just did Texas for the first time at the beginning of the week. And the first thing I want to do is invite you guys to invite me to come back and do that. I don't charge for it. It's free. I will be back in Texas in October. You give me 2 nights. You will know more about how an economy actually works than you ever thought you were going to know. It's fun. It's interesting. There is no math. People think, oh my gosh, do I need to bring a calculator? There is no math in economics, none. Because economics is not about math. It's about human beings. It's about understanding how human beings, if we're free, make each other wealthier. We're the only creature under the sun that does that. Right? If there's too many deer in the forest, they start to starve to death. But that doesn't happen with human beings. Everything you've heard about overpopulation is nonsense. We make each other richer, and it's a fascinating science. In any event, we have limited time today. I was going to talk about a little piece of economics, a little corner of economics for you this morning. I was going to talk about money, because a lot of people misunderstand money. Everybody deals with money, but people misunderstand it. People confuse money with wealth. They seem to be the same thing. What makes somebody wealthy? He's got a lot of money. Because money is wealth and wealth is money. But it's not true, Money is actually a tool we use to measure wealth. It's not wealth. It's a tool that measures wealth. Kind of like a clock is a tool that measures time, right? A clock is not the same thing as time, is it? It's a tool that measures time. If I bend back the arm of the clock, do I give myself more time? I break the clock. If I leave the clock alone, it measures time. If I mess with it, it doesn't do anything at all. And that's kind of where we are with money. So why is all of this relevant? Well, it's relevant because for about 80 years now, the official economic policy of the United States government has been based on the writings of an economic quack named John Maynard Keynes, who back in the 30s said that if your economy gets into trouble, you can fix it. How? By throwing lots of money around. If you look at this closely, you will see that he's making this same freshman economics student's mistake of confusing the money with the wealth. And I want to talk about Keynes and his theories today. It's very important to understand this. Not because he's right. He is totally, totally wrong. But our country's being run on this. That's why you need to know it. It's what we're doing, whether it's right or it's wrong. And my first question when I ran into Keynesian economics, as it's called, is where does the government get the money from which it's using to stimulate the economy? Governments only get money from three places. They can tax it, they can borrow it, or they can print it. If you know of any others, please tell me, because I only know those three. And let's go through those. Taxing does not seem to make a whole lot of sense. If the government taxes your money away from you and then gives it back to you, are you stimulated? It would have just left you alone. Well, what was that all about? And in fairness, that's not what Keynes says. He does not say to raise taxes. He actually says to cut taxes. It's a kind of an interesting irony because his followers have largely forgotten this part. The followers have latched on to everything else. The cutting taxes part they rarely talk about. But Keynes says to cut taxes and raise spending. He says tax less and spend more because the secret to prosperity, the secret to a healthy economy is debt. That deficits are the road to prosperity, and the bigger the deficits, the better. Okay? Because the government borrows money, it gets to stimulate the economy with the borrowed money, so it's not taking it out, it's only putting it in. When I was in college, we were learning about the Great Depression, and my teacher said that, they talked about the New Deal and Roosevelt's plans to stimulate the economy. I raised my hand and I said, but it didn't work. It didn't work. After 6 years of the New Deal, the unemployment rate in the United States was 25%. Not 8%, 25% after 6 years of this. And it wasn't going down, it was going up. 25 and rising. And I said, so how come it didn't work? And my professor said, well, it wasn't big enough, the New Deal. And that was interesting because a couple months ago on Fox News, they were celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Obama stimulus. Remember that? The Obama stimulus in 2009? And they had the obligatory conservative commentator and the obligatory liberal commentator discussing this. And what did the liberal lady say? Because they asked her, they said, well, how come it didn't work? And she said it wasn't big enough. This is like a nice trick. It never works. It was never big enough. I guess you can never, win this argument, really, if you play it like that. But that's what we've got here. And it's wrong because you are taking the borrowed money out of the economy. You're not taking it out of somewhere else. You're borrowing it from the economy. Every dollar borrowed must be lent. Must it not? Every dollar lent must be borrowed. Dollars borrowed, dollars lent. How could they be different? Well, if the government borrows the money, obviously there's less money for everybody else to borrow. So you're reducing part of the economy. It's like you're taking buckets of water on one side of the pond instead of on the other side of the pond. The only reason borrowing and lending exists in the world is very simple. There are some people who have more money than they want to spend right now. And there's other people who want to spend money right now they don't have. So you know what happens? The guy who wants to spend money he doesn't have goes to the guy who has money he doesn't want to spend and borrows it. Usually there's a bank in between. But the bank's just a middleman. The bank's just a broker. The guy who's borrowing the money from the other guy is going to have less to borrow if the government borrows it. You can't borrow the same money twice. And so that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. And the third thing you can do is you can print the money. And print it we do. If you're one of those people who worries that we're borrowing our deficit from China, you can stop worrying. We haven't borrowed a penny from China for years and years. We're printing it all. Okay? And what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is you devalue the currency that you've already got. It's called inflation. Okay? And inflation the earliest examples of inflation go back to some of the later Roman emperors who would literally melt down the coins and remix them, with lead. So you have a gold coin and they throw in 25% lead and then cast it again. Okay, that was what inflation looked like, in antiquity. But it's the same thing. It's government debasing the currency to take money out of your pocket that ends up in the hand of the government. What do they do with the gold that they took out of the coins? The emperor kept that. So that's the exact same thing that's happening. And when I do my seminar, I didn't bring it with me today, when I do my seminar, I usually bring with me one of my most prized possessions. I have a $100 trillion bill. And it's real. It's not a toy. It's not a fake. It's not a counterfeit. It is a genuine $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe, where 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars will buy you a 12-ounce Pepsi. That's what you feed into the soda machine to get your soda in Zimbabwe. And people say to me, that's crazy. Who came up with that? 100 trillion to a Pepsi. Well, no one specifically decided that it should be 100 trillion to a Pepsi. But the government of Zimbabwe would run out of money. They print more. And they made some important economic discoveries. I call this the Zimbabwe School of Economics. They discovered that it costs no more to print a $100 trillion bill than it costs to print a $1 bill. Did you know that? The zeros are free. The printers just throw those in for free. And so the government of Zimbabwe would just call up the printers and say, we ran out of money again. We need another tractor trailer truck full of money. Only this time, stick 3 more zeros on the end of everything and zoom it on down here because we're plumb out of money. What does our government do? Pretty much the same thing. Yeah. We've got a building in Washington called the Treasury. I don't know if you've ever been there, but if you go inside, you know what you find? It's a big printing press. They print bonds at the Treasury. That's what they do. And then a couple blocks away in Washington, there's another building called the Fed. Do you know what they do? They print money. Now here's the key question. What does the Fed do with the money it prints? They buy the bonds. So the money goes from the Fed to the Treasury, and the bonds go from the Treasury to the Fed. So you see how much more sophisticated we are than Zimbabwe. We've got 2 whole buildings throwing pieces of paper at each other, and that's how we pay for our government. Okay? What is the problem with this? Well, let me tell you. I'm thinking it was about 2 years ago, the government of Cyprus announced that they were going to confiscate 10% of everybody's bank account in Cyprus. You remember that was like a big news story for a week. That if you had a bank account in Cyprus, tough luck on you, we're taking 10% because we need it. And I remember that day really, really well because I'm talking to some group at economics almost every day. And for a month, when question and answer time came, I kept getting asked the same question first, which is, will the United States government do that to me? Are they going to come and confiscate 10% of my bank account? And it's a good question and a very important answer. The answer is no. The U.S. government will not be confiscating 10% of your bank account. I guarantee it, I promise you, for a very simple reason. They don't have to. They've got a much easier way of accomplishing the exact same thing. They can print their own money limitlessly. Why would they bother with annoying people by confiscating their bank accounts when you can just simply print your... I'll put this in personal terms. If you owned a printing press in your basement where you could print your own money limitlessly, okay, you ready? Would you rob a bank? Of course not. Robbing a bank is dangerous. You could get shot. You could get arrested. All kinds of bad things. If you could print your own money, no one would ever rob a bank. And that is how the United States government feels. Why go through all that trouble when we can just print and print and print and take the value out of the money without taking the money out of the bank? I don't know if any of you have saved up $100 trillion, for retirement, yet. But let's say you had. You've got $100 trillion you've saved, and you go to withdraw it, and you find it's enough to buy a Pepsi. You're going to feel like you've been robbed. And the bank's going to say, what are you talking? It's all there. Count it again. Every penny is there. And it is. It's there. But the value is gone. Okay? That's the problem with printing money. But Keynes disagrees with me. He says, no, he says printing is good and borrowing is good, and that's the road to prosperity. So let's get a notch deeper into Keynes' theory. It's interesting stuff. He says like this. He says, what causes a recession, Keynes says, is that there's too much supply and not enough demand. Too much stuff, not enough demand for stuff. He doesn't mean that there's too many, tennis rackets and not enough people playing tennis. He means there's too much of everything and not enough demand for anything. What caused that? Probably people saving money, because Keynes hates savings. Okay, you shouldn't save, you should go out and spend it. But if people, start saving their money, they won't buy enough, so there'll be too much supply and not enough demand. And then what happens is factories lay off workers. What do they need workers for? They can't sell the stuff they already made. Why would they pay the workers to make more stuff? So the workers are sent home, and they don't have paychecks. And what happens to demand? It falls further, because the workers don't have any money now. And Keynes says, see, you're in a trap. Demand is falling, the goods are sitting on the shelves. How do you get out of this trap? Now, you might say, well, if the workers were to get their jobs back at the factory and the wheels would start turning and everything would start moving along again. But Keynes says no. He says that won't do it. Getting their workers their old jobs back will not solve the problem, he says, because sure, that'll raise demand because the workers now have money. But it will also raise supply because the workers will be producing stuff. He says if supply and demand are out of whack and you raise them both, they're still out of whack. No, says Keynes. He says you have to find these workers a job where they will make money and thus have money and contribute to demand, but where they will produce nothing. So there won't be any more supply. And I was like, where do you find a job like that? Who's going to pay you to produce nothing? And I can tell that some of you have already read Keynes' book, because that's exactly what he says. He says the government. That's the answer. The government will hire people to produce nothing, and then there will be more demand and less supply, and we are on the road to prosperity. I want you to understand that efficiency has nothing to do with this. If the government hires you to dig a hole in the ground and then fill that hole back in with the same dirt, perfect job, says Keynes. You're doing nothing at all. You're getting paid. This is what's going to save our economy. So let's see where we are. Savings are bad. Inflation is good. Debt is good. Waste is good. We've had 14 United States presidents between Herbert Hoover and Barack Obama. Do you know how many of them believe this stuff? I count 13 out of 14. We've had one non-Keynesian president in the last 80 years, in our entire lifetimes. One who was not a Keynesian. All of the rest took this on the face. In fact, it was Richard Nixon, a Republican, interestingly, who famously said, we're all Keynesians now. They say there's no disagreement with this anymore. That this is the standard economic viewpoint. Waste and destruction. Oh, I even got destruction. I saved the best one for last. What else does Keynes like? He likes destruction. Because if you've got too much supply and not enough demand, if you destroy the supply, you won't have it anymore. So then you'll be on the road to prosperity again. So you may recall a couple years ago there was a big tidal wave, an earthquake that hit Japan and caused all kinds of death and destruction. And Paul Krugman, who's one of the leading Keynesians in America today, he won the Nobel Prize a couple years ago. Paul Krugman wrote an article and he said, darn, if only that could have happened to the United States. Some countries get all the luck. If only we could have had a huge tidal wave and earthquake cause massive death and destruction in the United States, we'd be on the road to economic recovery. Because destruction leads to wealth. Because it redresses that balance between supply and demand. Wars. Keynes loves wars. Wars are the best because it's like you get a double bonus out of it. Soldiers don't make consumer goods. They shoot bullets at each other. And they get paid for it. So there is demand without supply, and they blow stuff up. And then, were you guys not taught in school, as I was, that World War II stimulated the economy? Now all that destruction, you blow stuff up and then you get great jobs and that stimulates the economy. And I was like, if that's the answer, why doesn't Obama just call out the Air Force and carpet bomb, New York City, let's say? Nobody has to get hurt. Okay, we can evacuate everybody ahead of time. We'll send them down here. You guys, I'm sure, will put them up for a few weeks, okay? And they can stay with you. And then we just level Manhattan. We turn Manhattan into a pile of rubble. And then every unemployed person in America could be given a job rebuilding Manhattan. We could get unemployment down to 0 because everyone would have a job now rebuilding the city. The only problem with that is after a certain number of years, they would be done. Right? At some point, Manhattan has been 100% rebuilt, and then you have to lay everybody off because the job's over. But you know what you do then? You bomb it again. We can keep bombing and building and bombing and building and have 100% employment forever, except for one teeny tiny little problem. This is insane. And I want to welcome you to the world of mainstream economic thought in the United States today. There are 1,400 colleges and universities in the United States. How many of them do you think teach this in their economics department? Not as a theory. This is a fact. It is an undisputed, this is settled science. It's like global warming. We don't even discuss it anymore. We just teach it as the absolute, God-given truth. There's nothing else. That the secret to prosperity is waste, debt, destruction, and inflation. And then we're going to head on into the world of prosperity. This is what we're up against. Okay? This is the standard logic. There was a big piece in the New York Times over the weekend that cities and localities and states are starting to spend more money on stupid stuff again because they got more money since the recession, is winding down, and that's going to stimulate the economy because it's government spending that really makes us all rich. Really. There's so many ways to prove this wrong. I don't know where to begin, but one of my favorite is what I call the desert island test. Something about desert islands is just good for economics. The air is so clean and fresh, and the sunlight and the ocean breezes, and it clears your head, and economic ideas that are complicated become easy to understand if you go to a desert island. So I want to invite you guys to take an imaginary trip with me. Let's imagine that all of us here were on a ship, and our ship gets shipwrecked on a desert island like Robinson Crusoe. I was in California a couple months ago. They wanted it to be Gilligan's Island. So I'm going to leave that up to you whether you want Robinson Crusoe or Gilligan's Island. Okay? But I want to be the professor if it's Gilligan's Island. And we're shipwrecked and we've got no radio and no one knows where we are. We could be stuck on this island, for all you know, for the rest of our lives. Just imagine this with me for a moment. Would it not be immediately obvious to every single one of us? You wouldn't even have to discuss this. It would be immediately obvious that we all better start producing, don't you think? That we all better get to work if we're going to survive this ordeal. We would probably have a division of labor. This is a very basic economic concept because some people are better at some things, other people are better at other things, and we would try to figure out who was good at what. We would probably send somebody into the woods to go hunt for animals we could eat. We would have somebody catching fish, somebody building huts, somebody mending clothes, picking berries. We'd figure out what needed to be done, who was best at what. We'd probably exchange, don't you think? If I caught a fish and you would pick some berries, we could trade off and we'd each have, a more balanced meal. Now, let's imagine that I was on the island with you and I said, well, I'm a Keynesian, so I'm not going to produce anything. But by consuming, I'm going to stimulate you to produce more. What do you think? Okay? So I'm going to lie on the beach all day and get a suntan. But when dinner comes, I'm eating a double portion of dinner. I'm going to eat twice as much dinner as anybody else does, having contributed nothing to it. But I'm going to eat so much that's really going to stimulate, our economy. What do you think? Let's say you built a hut to shelter yourself from the rain, so you could sleep at night and not be exposed to the elements. And let's say I came along and I burned your hut to the ground. And I said, see, I've stimulated you. Now you can build it again. You thought you were going to be unemployed tomorrow, but I just got you a job rebuilding the hut I burned down. You're welcome. I think I'm going to find myself floating out to sea strapped to a coconut, I think is what's going to happen. I can't imagine anybody wanting me on their desert island. But I want you to understand that Keynes or his intellectual heirs, Obama, Nancy Pelosi, would look at this and say, no, he's the secret to your economy. It's his enormous appetite that's driving your whole economy. Do you think? Something is what desert islands is like. It's so obvious. And yet, in our big economy, we make this mistake all the time. We think that consuming is what leads to prosperity. I hear this on Fox News every day. A day doesn't go by where some commentator or host on Fox News does not say that if everybody just went to the store and bought stuff, then the economy would be fine. And that's absolute nonsense. That is poppycock. Consuming does not grow the economy. Not at all, not the teeniest, tiniest little bit. If it does anything, it shrinks the economy. If you bake a cake, you have made the economy bigger by one cake. If you eat a cake, you have made the economy smaller by one cake. Does that make sense? I'm not telling you not to eat it. You baked it, you're hungry, eat the cake, it's fine. That's what you baked it for. But don't tell me that eating that cake is making your neighbor richer. It's not. How we grow an economy is to produce more and consume less. If you consume more and produce less, you get poorer. I would have thought this was obvious till I got to college level economics, and suddenly it's not obvious anymore. So what's wrong with our country? Well, let's see. We've got 20 million Americans who work for government at all levels, and a few of them actually do things that need to be done and that are the appropriate job of government. The police, I didn't even know it was, I wore blue accidentally. I didn't know it was Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. But I agree, the police are a necessary job for government, and it needs to be done, and so that's fine. And I'd say the same thing about the U.S. military. Okay, there's no way that can be done other than through the government, and it's a job that needs to be done to whatever extent our country is in danger from foreign enemies. Then you get into jobs which actually do something, but would be done far more efficiently if they weren't done by the government. Teachers come to mind. I don't doubt that teachers teach, but teaching would be way more effective and productive if it were not done by the government. And then you get into millions and millions of government jobs that produce nothing at all. Or worse, they are negative producers. What do you think the Department of Energy does? They employ 9,000 people, by the way, at the Department of Energy. They shrank our supply of energy. We have less energy because we have a Department of Energy. What do you think the Department of Agriculture does? It shrinks the food supply. They pay farmers not to grow crops so that you get to pay more at the grocery store. You understand? They take taxes out of your paycheck to pay the farmers to grow less. And then that drives up the price so you pay for it again when you go to the supermarket. Would you like to pay for it a third time? Well, you know what else happens? The poor people can't afford the food. Why can't they afford the food? Because the express policy of the Department of Agriculture is to drive up the price of food. And so we take more money out of your paycheck to pay for the food stamps for the poor people. You pay for it 3 times over and get absolutely nothing. We've had the human race in agriculture for thousands of years. Okay, what do we need the department for? Nothing at all is the answer. So this goes on and on and on. We've got millions on unemployment. People have been on unemployment for years. Why do we have unemployment? Where did that come from? Is it because we felt charity, we had the spirit of Christian charity, we wanted to reach out and help these poor unemployed people? No. Unemployment insurance was invented by John Maynard Keynes with the express purpose of getting people to consume when they're not producing. That's the whole logic behind it. You pay people who are not working so they can keep buying stuff, and that'll make us richer. Oh, and by the way, the paying the farmers not to grow crops, that's Keynes also. During the Great Depression, he had the government destroy 8 million hogs, perfectly, nothing wrong with them, and just throw them in a ditch and bury them to reduce the food supply and drive up prices. And he also had them burn 2 million acres of cotton. to make there be less cotton. Okay, this is and our government's still doing this. Okay, this is what was written in the Constitution by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Nobody cares about that anymore. But what Keynes said back in the 30s, our government is following every instruction he gave them to this day. So anyhow, I got one more point I got to make on this, just specifically economically. Is it even true that supply and demand are out of whack? Is that even correct? And the answer is no. An early French economist by the name of Jean-Baptiste Say addressed this issue. And he deals with Keynes' theory about supply and demand being out of whack, and he proves it wrong. He doesn't name Keynes by name. You know why? Keynes hadn't been born yet. Keynes' theory was a theory that Say had proved wrong 100 years before Keynes was born. That didn't seem to bother anybody, that his theory had already been proven wrong. But Say says that supply and demand can't be out of whack. He says they've never been out of whack. Not once in the history of the world have supply and demand actually been out of whack. Do you know why? Because they're the same thing. This is called Say's law, and it's very simple. Supply is demand. They are not two different things. They are one and the same. They cannot be out of whack because the same thing can't be out of whack with itself. What does that mean, that supply and demand are out of whack? Well, let's take the case of the shoemaker. He makes shoes. The question is, why? Why does the shoemaker make shoes? Because he really loves shoes? He likes to be around, leather all day long? Somebody in California said he has a shoe fetish. Why does the shoemaker make shoes? Because he wants bread. That's why he makes shoes. But he can't go to the baker and say, give me bread. He's got to have something that the baker wants to get the bread. Why does the baker make bread? Because he wants the shoes. We all produce so we can consume. What are bread and shoes? Are they supply? Well, to you and me, they look like supply. But to the baker and the shoemaker, that's demand. The shoemaker brings his shoes to the marketplace. That's his demand. That's what he's putting out there to get what he wants from the market. You want more demand, you make more supply, because they're one and the same. Okay, I have two things I want to quickly end on. One is I'll do the books first. Years ago, my friends told me to write a book. And I did, and it was like the wrong book. Everybody thought I was going to write a 500-page tome about economics. But I had an epiphany that people don't read 500-page tomes about economics. You can put that on your coffee table and the dust will be 3 inches thick before anybody touches it. If you write something that's fun and funny and cute and accessible, you reach millions of people who are never going to read the economics book. So my first book is called The New Democrat, and it's basically a history of the Obama administration based on The Cat in the Hat. Has everybody read The Cat in the Hat? Okay. Cat shows up uninvited at this middle-class American home. What's he do when he gets inside? He wrecks the place. He wrecks everything he touches. And I was like, that's kind of like Obama, I'm thinking. And the fascinating thing about the cat is that he never gets it. To the last page of the book, the cat never understands that he's the problem. Like, it's obvious to everybody else, but not to the cat. And I was like, that's Obama. Can you imagine the man ever perceiving that he's the problem? Like, in a million years, that thought would never pop into his head that he's the problem. And then he's got these two little friends, Thing 1 and Thing 2. You remember them? And they became Pelosi and Reed. And I found myself writing, I think this is the first published history of the Obama years. It goes through bailouts and stimuluses and birth certificates and illegal aliens and death panels, like everything you remember from 6 fun-filled Obama years, all in rhyme, and the parallelism is amazing. It's just like The Cat in the Hat, except it's about Obama. I got my first book review on this. Salon.com called this the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter out there. I was a happy man that day. That's on the cover now. And I was moved to write my second book, because this one did very well. Who's read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? Okay, Dr. Seuss was a huge leftist. He was a member of the Socialist Party. He was a left-winger on every issue imaginable. He fills his books with little left-wing messages for your kids. And the Lorax was his journey into the world of environmental wackoism. It is about an evil capitalist who cuts down trees and makes consumer goods. And we learned that that's bad, bad, bad. He drives the trees to extinction. He wipes them out. There's no more trees. And then he goes out of business. And I read this to my kids. I was like, does that make sense to you? Do you think that capitalists destroy species that their business depends on? Do you think that Colonel Sanders is going to drive the chicken to extinction? I want to know who worries about that. That Colonel Sanders is going to throw every last chicken into the fryer, and then you will never see another chicken because they'll be extinct forevermore. See, I think it's just the opposite. I think Colonel Sanders cares more about the survival of the chicken species than pretty much anybody else in the world. I think he probably cares more than the chickens do. Okay? His whole business, he's going to constantly make more chickens to keep his business going. Moreover, I'll tell you something else. There are more chickens alive in the world today than ever before in the history of this planet. Do you know why? Because we like to eat them. That's why. The greatest thing that ever happened to a species is that human beings like to eat you. This is like winning the species lottery, okay? We clear millions of acres just for you. We keep the predators away. We keep you warm in the winter. You're sick. We call in doctors for you. What other species gets treated like this? It's the greatest thing that ever happened to them. Now, in the end, we're going to kill you and eat you. But that was going to happen anyhow, because, what's going to happen in the wild? You're going to get killed and eaten, and far more unpleasantly in the wild than on old McDonald's farm. So my book is called The Gorax, because it stars Al Gore as the Lorax character, and it's the story of how America used to be free and prosperous because we were free. And then the environmentalists showed up and started driving everybody out of business. The regulation after regulation after regulation. The businesses closed, the jobs disappear. By the end of my book, there are no more businesses, there are no more jobs. The only thing still functioning is the Fed, which keeps printing money. And I'm going to read you the very end of this because I like how it ends. And I'm one of those rare authors who doesn't mind telling you how my book ends. So this is the very end of the book. He says, so, I took a few stones from my factory lot, and I spelled out a word that's worth more than I've got. A word that means everything to one who has lost, because freedom is worth it, whatever the cost. And now that you're here, it's all plain to see that freedom itself just isn't free unless people like you are willing to fight to bring back our freedoms. It'll never be right. So catch calls the 1%ler. He let something fall. It's the Constitution, the last copy of all. You're in charge of our heritage. Don't let us down. Teach your friends and your children. Spread it around. Stand up for your freedom against socialist schemers, environmentalist wackos, and utopian dreamers. Don't let crackpot economists and left-wing politicians get in the way of your most vital mission. If we can pry our country from these political hacks, maybe our prosperity and all will come back. So that's my second. If you're interested, I brought some with me on the back table. There are 20. I can autograph them. They make cool gifts for conservatives, if you know any, and checks and credit cards are fine. You want me to go ahead with questions?
If you're ready.
Okay. Well, I was going to do a video, although the video is expendable.
Well, if you don't mind, let us do the questions, because if some people need to leave, they could, but if they have time to stay, they could watch. Is that okay?
Oh, no, I think that's fine. And probably we'll do questions, and then if people need to leave, I'll let them go ahead and get the book before they go, and then we do videos for people who are left.
I think what you just read leads perfectly into this first question.
Okay.
Should the Fed exist at all?
No, I don't think it should. I really don't. The whole purpose of the Fed is to have this fake money that gets tampered with. And it's interesting. The two sides of this really agree on the key point. If you ask someone who's in favor of the Fed why we have the Fed, he'll say so that these guys can go in and fiddle with the value of money in case our economy needs to be fixed. And that's exactly the reason. It's exactly the reason I'm against it, because of two things. First of all, it assumes that they're uncorruptible, and I think everyone's corruptible. The power to reach into everybody's pocket and everybody's bank account in the entire country, in some cases the entire world, is just too much of a power. Personally, I'd be corrupt in a week if you gave me that much power. So I don't think the Fed should have that much power. And the second thing is the mistaken assumption is that they know what they're doing. And I don't have time today to explain this, but what caused the recession in 2009 and 2010, that was the Fed. They caused it. They also caused the Great Depression. It's very easy to demonstrate how they screwed this up. So if you understand that they're human beings, they don't know what they're doing, and they're potentially corruptible, if you have money based on something like gold or something analogous to that just people say, what's special about gold? Well, nothing. It just keeps people honest. You can't tamper with it. Gold is gold. It's tamper-proof, and that's the advantage to it, and you don't have to go through this whole Fed rigmarole.
I'm pleased to announce, thanks to Tim bringing us up to date, the Keystone Pipeline passed the House while our speaker was speaking.
I like to think I had a little something to do with that.
There you go. We'll let you take that credit.
How does Friedman figure into your economic view?
Milton Friedman?
I would assume that's who you're talking about.
Milton Friedman was a great advocate.
She said yes.
Okay, he's a great advocate of free markets. He's a very good guy. Well, was a very good guy. He's passed on. I don't agree with him on everything. I'm an Austrian school person myself, and Friedman has a somewhat, more moderate view. Friedman believes in the Fed and the government printing money. Okay, we Austrian school types think we'd actually be much better off if government stayed out of the money business, as they did in, for instance, 19th century America. People think this is a radical idea to get government out of money, but we had privately produced money in the 19th century, and it worked far better because the privately produced money had to be backed up. Banks would issue notes, but they'd be backed up by gold. And if you brought that note to the bank, they had to give you your ounce of gold. And if they didn't have it, they'd have to go bankrupt because they were contractually obligated to. And that seems to be that's a better system. And Milton Friedman would disagree with me on that. So I agree with him on a lot of things, but I go a little bit farther than he does.
How long has Keynes theory been taught in high schools?
Oh my goodness. I'm not sure I could tell you when it first got taught. I think that most high schools avoid economics altogether. But he's doing his writing predominantly in the 30s. The ideas have been pretty standard ever since then. So that'd be my guess.
What is your opinion on the fair tax proportional for everyone above the poverty line versus the current IRS tax system?
Well, almost anything is better than the current IRS tax system. I am not a huge follower of the fair tax movement for a couple reasons, one of which is they proudly state that they're revenue neutral, which is a deal breaker for me right there, because I think the biggest problem is that we need to radically shrink the government. See, contra everything Keynes says, and this is why this is such an important argument, virtually everything that the government does makes us all poorer. Okay, except for some law enforcement, some national defense stuff. So virtually all making us poor. So I'm not interested in changing the tax code if we're not shrinking the government, which sadly is what the fair tax people want. What they want to do is they want to put the tax on consumption instead of production, and I would tend to agree with that. So I probably agree with them on some things and disagree with them on others. But I think shrinking government is really the number one priority that we need to have as national policy.
I'm having a little trouble reading this one. I'm going to ask whoever wrote this to help me here. Banks used to
expand money 7-to-1.
Okay. Now they expand it 40-to-1. Problem?
Well, sure. I mean, and again, particularly when you're doing this, you don't have assets behind it. What you're doing is causing bubbles. I mean, again, it's a complex question. It's hard to answer in a minute. But what caused the housing bubble What causes this whole boom-bust cycle in the 30s, it happened with the stock market, the boom and the bust, and a few years ago it happened with the housing market. It was the same process. And it comes by creating a boom, by giving people the false impression that there's more wealth than there is. Okay, that's what sends the housing market. By mixing up the economy's natural signals, you create the illusion that people are more prosperous than they are, and then they'll all run out and spend lots of money, and it feels really good until the whole thing falls apart because the productivity is not there. You know, if we all woke up tomorrow morning and found we were, multimillionaires, we might all run out to, buy a Rolls Royce. But they're going to run out of Rolls Royces because they're making green pieces of paper. They're not making Rolls Royces. Is the answer to the question. So it is a problem, and you avoid the whole boom and bust cycle by avoiding the boom, which doesn't mean that the economy can't grow. It absolutely can. But the boom is an artificial misunderstanding about the amount of prosperity that's out there that causes people to make poor decisions. It's like getting drunk, and you wake up with a hangover. And what the Fed wants to do is get you drunk again. It's like when you were drunk, you were happy. So, let's get drunk again. Now, it was great last night, okay? But the solution is not to get drunk at all. The solution is to stay sober and pay attention to what's actually happening with the economy and not go through these illusions.
What would be the steps to stop the government from continuing to use this form of economics?
You have to bring in people who actually understand economics, as I've attempted to demonstrate today. The more you talk about Keynesian economics, the more ridiculous it sounds. And this is the kind of conversation we need to be having. You cannot have a Congress of economic illiterates with this vague idea that government spending must be good, and there is a concerted effort to get that message out there. It's easy enough to prove wrong, but not when the Democrats are absolutely convinced that government spending makes people richer, and the Republicans avoid the issue. Republicans don't like to talk about it at all. I mean, it can't be both. If government spending makes us all poorer, as I think I can very, very clearly demonstrate that it makes us hugely poorer than we ought to be, then how come the Republicans aren't shrinking the government? That's an uncomfortable question. So the Republicans usually avoid the topic altogether. Somebody's got to start talking about it. That's where it begins.
Please give us your website.
Okay, the website that I have is for my books, which is obamaparody.com. But they're cheaper here. And so just see me in the back of the room. I also have a Facebook page, which is my name on Facebook. And I hope you'll all friend me there, because if I do this video, I'm going to put that on my Facebook page, and about 2 or 3 times a week I do one of my little editorials of the day with whatever group I'm with. So it's the best way to keep up with me.
Please come back. We need to hear your teaching.
Well, thank you. If you give me 2 nights in October, okay, we'll do the whole seminar, and I think you will like it. I haven't had a disappointed group yet in 300 times. Books, then video. Give me.
How would you like to do it?
Are there people who need to leave?
I think we're okay on time.
We're okay. Okay. Yeah. What I usually do at this point. Okay, pardon?
Whatever you want, we will.
Okay. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna do my quick editorial and with you guys, and then I'll go over. And if people want to see the book, I'm happy to do that.
That sounds good.
Okay. So I just need somebody to push the button over here.
You get it.
Okay. And here's what we're gonna do. You have to tell me the name of the group again. It's complicated.
Grassroots America, we the people.
Grassroots America, we the people.
Yes.
Okay. Make sure I've got. So I'm going to say I'm here in Tyler, Texas, with Grassroots America, we the people. Okay. And then you guys want to applaud. See, when I say that. Okay. And if it's like people are going to say, I guess there's 2 of them, and they have 1 hand each. If you're enthusiastic, it sounds good on the video. Okay. And you're applauding yourselves. So I'm here with Grassroots America, we the people, in Tyler, Texas. You want to applaud. And then I'm going to give a 3-minute editorial in the news of the day. And then at the end of that, I'm going to say I'm the free market warrior. That's like my sign-off. Those are the last words I'm going to say. You want to applaud again. Got it? So once when I say the group, and once at the end when I say I'm the free market warrior. You want to let their applause run for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, and shut it off. Okay, the same button that turns it on turns it off.
Good.
So let me just get centered here. And anytime, and don't talk, just point at me. I'm Loren Spivack, the free market warrior, and I'm here in Tyler, Texas, with Grassroots America, We the People. And I've got a free market warrior moment for you. The president has announced his plan to send everybody to community college for free. What a deal. And yet it's not. Frankly, the sad state of American education, and this is just the last leg of this, shows the utter economic folly of the entire government-controlled educational system. High school diplomas aren't enough anymore because nobody learns anything in high school anymore. People actually used to be educated when they graduated from high school, and now they know nothing. And now we're going to waste 2 more years of everybody's life learning more nothing in an inflated process. It's already been very clearly demonstrated by a number of economists that the more government aid to help people go to college, the greater the tuition goes up. This is an economic rule, an economic law that you can't get around. When things are free, they're worthless. People who actually pay to go to college will make a much better decision about where to go there. They will take far more seriously what they learn when they get there, and we will get out of this ridiculous academic inflation where people spend more and more time in school and learn less and less and less, and the entire society bears more and more of the burden for the cost of doing this. Barack Obama's latest gambit is not going to be the last step in this because it doesn't work, and there will be a need to send everyone to graduate school for free soon enough. I'm the free market warrior.